Okay, so that's given us our basics for creating three-dimensional geometry in SketchUp. So now we can just jump straight into our project, which is a little step stool, as I mentioned before. Before we get started though, I'll just quickly show you what we'll actually be creating. So as you can see, it's a pretty simple project. I've got a couple of different sizes of timber. We've got some chamfered edges, we've got some splines in there. We've even got some radiused edges and some holes for the screws or bolts. So we'll get started by creating a new SketchUp file by hitting Control N. Okay, to get started with, I'm going to click on the line tool and I'm going to click right on this origin where all three of those axes meet. Now the first piece of timber we're going to be drawing is 60mm wide by 30mm thick. So now that I've clicked in the origin, I'm going to drag along the green axis and I'm actually going to type in 60 on my keyboard. Now you can see it changes the value in this length box down in the bottom right when I type in 60 and hit enter. So what that does is actually draws a line for me that's 60mm long. Now this is going to be a 30mm thick piece of timber, so I'm going to click on the end point and drag it out along the red axis, which is perpendicular to the green, and I'm going to type in 30. So keep an eye on the length box down in the bottom right, and I hit enter, and that gives me a 30mm line. Now I'm just going to close this shape by dragging back along the green axis and click on that end point. So now that's given me my section for my 60x30 timber. Now that I've got that shape drawn, I'm going to click on the push-pull tool to turn this into a 3D object. So click on that surface and move my mouse up, and now I'm going to type in 350 and hit enter. So that has extruded that shape 350mm straight up. This object we've just extruded is one part of our end frame, which is the legs of the step stool. Now I'm going to want another copy of this object, and I'm going to want to have it 290mm over this way, which will give us an overall width for our stool of 350mm. So I'm going to hit space to go back to select tool. Now if I just click on a surface, it will just select that surface. If I double click on a surface, it selects the surface and all of its edges. If I click 3 times on a surface, it selects all of the connected surfaces and all of their edges. So that's a handy way to select a complex object in a crowded drawing. So now I'm going to click on this tool up here with the 4 arrows, and that's our move tool. So as it sounds, if you click and drag your mouse around, it will move an object. If I press Control on my keyboard while I've got move selected, it actually turns into a copy tool. So I can create copies of this object. So I'm going to do that. So I've got Control hit, I'm going to move my cursor along the green axis, and I'm going to type in 290 and press enter. So that's given me an exact copy of that object, and this overall length is 350mm, as you can see down here. That tool I used just then is the measure tool, the tape measure tool. So that's useful for setting out construction lines or just checking distances between things. So if I click on this point over here, you see the little box down in the bottom right tells me what that distance is. Okay, so there's just one last thing to draw for this end frame, which is the piece that goes along the top. Now I'm going to want to have mitered corners on each of these uprights, so I'm going to select my select tool, click on this inside edge, hold down Control and click on this other inside edge. Now Control lets you select multiple things. I'm going to select my move tool and I'm going to click on this corner, move my mouse down, and I'm going to type in 60mm and hit enter. So now that's given me a 45-degree angle. Now to get this last piece, I can't use the push-pull tool on this face because it will extrude it perpendicular, so it doesn't really help me. So what I need to do is actually draw the lines in to create this shape. So I'm going to switch to my line tool, and I'm just going to connect the dots. So click on that point, and that point, that point, and that point. I'll click on that point and that point, and the last 2 points will finish that shape off for me. So you can see it's filled in every closed shape on there and turned it into a 3D object. So I'm going to switch back to my select tool by hitting space. I'm going to click 3 times on one of these faces, and you can see that selects all of the connected geometry. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to hit make component. I'm going to call this an end frame from the name, and I'm going to hit create. Now what a component does, it groups a bunch of objects together. So now when I click on this, it's treated as one object, so I can't actually use my push-pull tool on any of these faces now. If I double click on this component, it puts me into component edit mode, so I can actually go through and individually edit these objects within the component. So if I click outside that, it takes me out of component edit mode, and that's back to being a solid component. The reason for making this into a component is that we're going to have exactly the same arrangement on the other end of the step stool. And the beauty of having this as a component means I can actually double click on this, go into the component edit mode, make changes to this, and any copies of this component will automatically receive those changes. So I'll show you what I mean now. I'm going to, using my select tool, click on the component, switch to move, click on this outside corner, move along the red axis and hit control. Now I'm going to type in 340 millimeters, so that will give us an overall width of 370. So that's going to be the length of my step stool. Now you can see it's created a copy of that component. Now if I double click on my original component and use the push-pull tool to lift up that top face, you can see any changes I make to this component happen to the copy that I've made. So if you've got lots of repeating objects, components are a great way to make sure that changes are consistent. So I'm just going to hit Ctrl Z to undo that, exit out of the component mode by just clicking anywhere on the screen, and now we'll get on to making these side rails. So to make these side rails, I'm actually going to draw lines directly onto these faces. Now this is another benefit of turning these into components. So if I draw a line across there, that line is completely separate to the component, so it doesn't actually split that surface. Whereas if I am in component edit mode, or if these are not a component and I draw a line across there, we'll actually split that surface. So it's a very handy way to actually keep your objects separated so they don't interfere with each other. So I'm going to draw these side rails by drawing directly onto this surface. Now I want this to be 20 millimeters in from the face, and this is going to be a 60 mm by 19 mm piece of timber. So I'm going to click on my measuring tape tool, and just anywhere along this edge here I'm going to click, move along my green axis and type in 20. So that's actually given me a construction line which I can use to snap to. I'm going to repeat that for the top, so I want this to be 20 mm from the top. So that's given me my top corner for this rail. I'm going to do it on the other side as well. Just click anywhere on this edge, drag back along the green line and type in 20. So now when I click on my line tool, you can see it actually snaps to those intersections. So they act as construction lines for my geometry. So I'm going to click on that intersection, move down along the blue axis, and I'm going to type in 60 millimeters. Now I'm going to move along the green axis and type in 19, and go back up, and you can see it snaps perpendicular to that construction line. So I'm going to click on that and close my shape. So I've got a surface there now which I can use my push-pull tool on and drag it out. Now I could try and figure out what the distance between this point and this point is, but SketchUp actually lets us reference a surface. So with the push-pull tool, I just orbit my view around with my middle mouse button, and if I just move my mouse over this surface, it actually snaps to it. So I know that the length of this is going to be exactly the same as the length between these two faces. So that's one rail done. Now I'm going to want to have a copy of this on the other side, so I'm going to click 3 times on it, right click and hit make component. So this is going to be my side rail, and I'm going to use the move tool, click on this top right hand corner, press Control on the keyboard to copy it, and I'm going to snap it to this intersection. Now I don't need these construction lines anymore, so I'm going to hit space to go into my select tool, and I'm going to select those by holding Control and hit delete. Now I could just glue the ends of these rails to the face of these end frames, but that's not going to be a very strong connection. So what I want to do is actually have a mortise and tenon joint. So the reason I've made this a component means that I can just put the tenon on each end of this, and it will copy through to the rail that I've copied. So I'm going to double click on that to go into component mode. Now you see I can't actually see the end of these pieces of timber, so it's going to be very difficult to draw those tenons on. So I'm going to go up to View, Component Edit, and I'm going to hit Hide Rest of Model. So you can see that's actually hidden the rest, so we can see the ends of this. Now I'm going to show you how to use the offset tool. Now this will create copies of lines, and you can offset them from their original position by a certain distance. So I'm going to offset these ones by 5mm. So to do that, I just clicked anywhere on the face, move my mouse a bit, and you can see it showing me there's a copy of those lines. Type in 5mm and hit enter. So now I've got two separate faces, and I can push pull on this one to make my tenon. So I'm going to make that a 20mm tenon. So I type in 20 and hit enter. Now you can see it's copied all those changes to the other one over there. Orbit around, and I'm going to do the same on this end. So click on the face, type in 5, push pull tool on this face here, and type in 20mm. So that's given me both my tenons on each of those side rails. Okay, so now we've got the tenons on each end of these rails. We need to add some mortises to the end frames. So I'm using my select tool. I'm going to double click on one of my end frames, which will take us into component edit mode. Now I could set out all of those construction lines again and redraw where I want my my mortise to be, but an easy way to do that is to select each of these faces, right click, and under intersect faces we hit with model. Now what that does is it checks to see any surfaces that are intersecting the ones we had selected, and it will actually draw a line around them. So that's actually split my surface to match up with the outside edge of my rails. So that's a handy way of sort of transposing lines from one object to another. So I'm going to use that outside line the same way I did to make my tenons, by using the offset command on that surface, 5mm, again on this one, 5mm, and then I'm just going to, holding Control, go around and delete these outside boxes on each end and hit delete. Use my line tool to reconnect each of these diagonals, and then using the push pull tool I'm just going to sink my mortises in. So click on that surface and drag backwards, and then I'm going to type in 20mm. Repeat that for this little triangle bit, 20mm, and for this mortise over here, 20mm and 20mm. Now I've got an extra little edge in there, so I'm just going to select that and hit delete just to keep it tidy. So that's put our mortises in there, which our tenons fit into, but as you can see, because this is a component that we've just copied across, it's added those mortises to this outside face. So we're going to actually have to flip this around an axis. So I'm just going to click on this to select it, and I'm going to go right click and go flip along, and I think we want this to go along the green axis. No, maybe along the red axis. Yeah, there we go. So as you can see, it's flipped those mortises to the inside, so that all lines up. Now those tenons will fit in there nicely. I'll just move this one across to show you how it fits together. So now all that's left to do is add some slats that we stand on and some splines to the end of this, and then we'll chamfer some of the edges and add some radiuses.